Good evening. We'll begin here with Genesis chapter 29, and we're going to talk about Jacob in Syria. And we'll get into details and also what it means when it is God's school of hard knocks. What exactly does it mean? And we're going to talk about how Jacob is being dealt by God concerning his sin here, and you're going to see more so into God's mercy on this man Jacob eventually, but he has to go through things that will teach him a hard lesson about deception. And we'll begin here in Genesis chapter 29 verse 1, and he says here, then Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. Notice that it says that Jacob went in his journey. And this is after he had encountered God in a dream. He went to Syria, as Hosea 12:12 says that Jacob fled into the country of Syria. He was fleeing from his brother Esau. Now, this is not God's intention for him to leave Canaan, and that's why he said that Jacob went on his own journey. This is his journey, and he fled, running away from his brother. And this was not God's intention, but this was Jacob's own way, and his mother was also Rebecca. This is their own way. You see, this was not God's way, and as a result, he will face many challenges. And if you notice in Proverbs 14 verses 12, it says, there is a way that seems right unto a man, but the ways of death. And he was clearly the blessed son, but he will suffer greatly. And this is Jacob's own way, and he fleeing into by his own volition. And this was absolutely not God's way for him, and this was not God's journey or God's guiding him. And this man is going to spend all his life, all his youth, out of God's will. And here he begins here in verse 2. It says, and he looked, and behold, a well in the field, and lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. And here in the meantime, Jacob came to a well, and here they call it Jacob's well. But here he comes to a well, and additionally, there were 3 flocks of sheep at the well, and a great stone upon the well's mouth. And then in verse 3, it says, and thither were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in his place. And here the people move the stone from the well's mouth, and they use it to water the sheep, and after that they'll cover the well back with the stone. And it says, and Jacob said unto them, my brethren, whence be ye? And they said, of Haran are we. And he said unto them, know ye Laban the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. And he said unto them, is he well? And they said, he is well, and behold, Rachel his daughter cometh with the sheep. And Jacob came to the man and asked, where are you from? And the man said that we are from Haran. And Jacob said to them, do you know Laban? And the man said, yes. Again, Laban is Jacob's uncle, Rebekah's brother, his mother's brother. And Jacob said, is Laban well? Is he well? And the man said, yes. And by the way, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep. And women gathered sheep and watered the sheep as an occupation back then. And here, he says in verse 7, and he said, Lo, it is high day, neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together. Water ye the sheep and go and feed them. And, see, Jacob, he says, it's not the time for the sheep to be gathered, and it's still high day. And he says, water the sheep and go and feed them. And here is a snippet of Jacob, of who Jacob is. He's a cocky man and unapologetically cunning. He was very cunning, and he just got there, and already he's telling these people what to do. These are experienced shepherds. He's telling them what to do. And he just met these folks. And so there are so many Jacobs today. They had little life experience, but seem as though they have figured out life itself. And life will eventually is going to teach this man a hard lesson in humility, because he's very cocky at this point. And here it begins and then in verse 9 it says, And they said, We cannot until the flocks be gathered together, until they roll the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. And while he spake with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And then the shepherd said to Jacob, We cannot until the flocks are gathered. And, Jacob's advice was not taken well by the shepherds. And he says that while he was talking, Rachel came with her father's sheep because she kept them. Again, not only did women tend sheep, but they were also shepherds in those days. But also in the days of Abraham and all the way down to the days of Moses, because just as it says in the days of Moses in Exodus 2:16, it says, Now the priest of the Midian and 7 daughters. Now the priest of the Midian has 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled their troughs to water the flocks. See, women those days also were shepherds, and they were also to tend the sheep as well. And here you have Rachel. She was a shepherdess, and she's coming here to the place of the well to take care of these sheep. And then he says, And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. Now Jacob is now in excitement after seeing Rachel, and these were also his uncle's sheep. And he came here, finally he sees them, and he came and watered his uncle's sheep. And afterwards he kissed Rachel, not a romantic, but a greeting kiss, and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob obviously had been traveling long at this time, and he's currently very emotional here. But this, for Jacob now, after seeing this girl, woman named Rachel, this is Uncle Laban's daughter, and this was for him a love at first sight. This was a love at first sight, and he came and was excited and to meet her. And then he says in verse 12, And it came to pass when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. Now Laban came to meet Jacob embraced him and kissed him. Again, this was a greeting kiss. And he says that he told Laban all these things. And, Jacob had a lot to say about his journey. And then Laban said, sure, you are my nephew. And then he allowed him to stay with him for a month. Now, here's the tricky part begins in the next verse, because Laban is going to get the upper hand of all of it. And this man, again, a man like Laban is a very tricky man. He's a very conniving man. He's obviously a very greedy and covetous human being. And he's going to use this man, Jacob, and he's going to get the upper hand in this man's life. And this is where God is sending this man now. He's putting this man to a place where he's going to learn about life lesson, because this was Jacob, who was full of tricks, and he's full of deception, and he deceived his father and deceived his brother and ran away. But again, he's going into this house of a depraved man by the name of Laban, his uncle. And then in verse 9, it says here in verse 15, and Laban said unto Jacob, because thou art my brother. Now this is after Jacob has stayed with Laban for a month now in his house. And he says, and Laban said unto Jacob, because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And again, Jacob has stayed for a month in his uncle's house, but a hustler like Laban, he wouldn't just let him there without squeezing every sweat from him. And notice here how he, phrased his question very carefully and very cleverly. He said, because you're my brother, should you therefore serve me for nothing? And first of all, Jacob didn't ask for any work. You see, he was there as a guest and a family member. But now, Uncle Laban, he wants to put him to work. And he said, what shall your wages be? What is your wages? In other words, I want you to start working so you can pay for your room that you're staying. Or in other words, he says, I want you to start working so you can be useful around here. Here you see Jacob, he used to be a tent dweller. This man is a tent dweller, and he thought he was going to be a tent dweller outside Canaan. And now, you see that once you leave the outside of the Canaan, the place that he was protected, he is now going to be in the mercy of this man. See, because now he's going to work the field. This man is trying to put him to work to do the work the field, and he's going to work this field throughout the entire time he's been with this uncle of his. And Jacob thought he was cunning, but now he's going to meet Uncle Laban, who's a master cunning, master person in deception. And now the school of deception now begins here. So it says in verse 16, and Laban had 2 daughters, and the name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. See, he had 2 daughters. Laban had 2 daughters, Leah and Rachel. And it says here, and Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. Means that Leah was not so beautiful, and Rachel was beautiful. And also, what he says about Rachel, it wasn't just that she was beautiful, she was also well-favored. In other words, she was her father's favorite, you see. And he says in verse 18, and Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel thy younger daughter. He said that Jacob loved Rachel, and here you see poor Jacob. He is madly in love with Rachel, and Laban is going to use him for Rachel now. He's going to use his love that he had for Rachel to squeeze out his useful strength. And Jacob thought he was a smart cookie, but he was young and foolish and madly in love. And Laban, his uncle, is an old crook, so he's going to use his daughter. Jacob's love for Rachel is going to cost him, and Laban is going to hustle everything out of Jacob now. And this man is going to serve Laban for 7 years for her younger daughter Rachel, and Laban is going to hustle everything out of him. And afterwards this man is going to cry out to God. But here you see this man is now excited about this, and he's just wanting to serve for 7 years for his younger daughter. And verse 19, it says, and Laban said, it is better that I give her to thee than that I give her to another man. Abide with me. Notice the pious statement. He's acting so virtuous here. Laban says, it is better to give her to you than to give her to another man. After all, you are my nephew. And it says, and Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for he loved her, for the love he had to her. The love Jacob had to her, it seemed like nothing. Evidently he loved Rachel and will give and do almost anything for her. And here you see Jacob's good quality. He was a go-getter and a hard worker. But in the case here, it was for Laban's advantage, not Jacob. And he served 7 years, and it didn't seem to him like nothing. It didn't seem nothing to him. And he did a great service for Laban, and he did great because of Rachel, because he had to serve to earn and also take this woman as a wife. For example, for the most part in Genesis 30 verses 26, he said, talking about his service. He did a great service to Uncle Laban. In Genesis 30 verse 26, it says, give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee. See, whom I have served thee, and let them go, for thou knowest my service, which I have done thee. See, this man served this man, and he served him for wife, just to get wife. And also in Hosea 12:12, it says, Jacob fled into the country of Syria, and Israel served for a wife. And for his wife, he kept sheep. And this was what he was doing. He served to his uncle for a wife, because he wants to, marry Rachel. And Jacob was faithful to his uncle for Rachel, but got little nothing out of it. And he's gonna get little nothing out of it. And I wish he would have devoted more to God. But here, this man served, and he's going to serve for all these years. And once he said, and after 7 years are now fulfilled, after he has served for 7 years and now fulfilled. In other words, Jacob served Laban for full 7 years. And this is what they agreed for full 7 years. And in verse 21, it says, and Jacob said unto Laban, give me my wife. And this is after he has served. For my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to him. And he went in unto her. Again, Jacob, he came to Laban after he had served all these years, 7 full years. And he asked, give me my wife that we agreed, so to take her as my wife. And then he says that Laban gathered people. He made a feast, and that was the custom of the day. It's kind of like when people are getting married, you made this wedding reception. And Laban in the evening, he brought Leah, and not Rachel. He brought Leah, the elder daughter of Laban. And then it says that Jacob slept with her, in a marriage bed, and thinking that this was Rachel. This is the woman that thinking that this is the woman that he has served. And interesting to know here that he brought her in the evening. The feast, first he made the feast, and then he brought Leah in the evening. And again, you can ask why the feast and why in the evening. And again, first, again, speculating that in the feast you have wine and people can drink wine. Jesus' times there was a feast and there was wine. And here, when people make a feast, there's always alcohol or drinks, that wine that goes in there. So this was to make Jacob, probably, again speculating, probably drunk. And then in the evening, when it's not that night, when it's not day, you can switch the person. And you see, it takes, while this thing is going on, Leah takes the place of Rachel, and because he was switched by Laban. And it says here in verse 26, and it says in verse 24, it says, and Laban gave his daughter Leah Zilpah, maid for an handmaid. And it came to pass in the morning, again here it says, in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is it that thou hast done unto me? Did I not serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? And Jacob took in Leah, and in the morning, after Jacob perhaps may have sobered up, and he found out that it was Leah, not Rachel. And Jacob said to Laban, what have you done? I served for Rachel. And why do you cheat me? Again, the trickster is now being tricked. And it sounds familiar, Jacob tricking his brother Esau. Now his deception now catches up to him. And Laban said, it must not be so done in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me, yet 7 other years. And Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. See, now Laban said there's a slight change of plans. There are ways in our country that I forgot to tell you. You see, this man is very cunning. And he says the elder must be married first before the younger. So he said, then fulfill her week. In other words, serve and earn her again. In other words, work for another 7 years so that I can give you Rachel. Again, 2 wives. Isn't this polygamy? Keep in mind that historical record, again, is not God's approval. Just because things happen in the Bible does not mean that God approved it. Slavery, you can add that one too. But here you have polygamy, this man, and this is clearly based off of man's sin, greed. This man was greedy, and he wants to squeeze everything out of Jacob, so he make this switch. Now he say, okay, fulfill her week, work for another 7 years, and Jacob worked for Rachel for another 7 years, and then he finally got his wife that he wanted. And he says, and in verse 29, and Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her maid. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. Again, notice Leah and Rachel were all accompanied by a handmaid. And they are going to play a part in Jacob's life. Likewise, it says, Rachel is loved more than Leah by Jacob. And in addition to 14 years, Jacob served Laban for Rachel. Now he also served another 7 years. And as in Genesis 31:41 says that, thus I have been 20 years in thy house. See, this man ended up serving more years than he intended. And he says in verse 31, he says, and when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. You see, the Lord saw that Leah was hated and Leah was rejected because of the fact that Jacob didn't love Leah to begin with. He loved, the woman he loved was Rachel. But now the Lord saw that Leah was hated. He opened her womb, and he says that Rachel was barren. And in verse 32 it says, and Leah conceived and bare a son, and he called his name Reuben. For she said, surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. See, Leah gave birth to his firstborn, Reuben. And she said that the Lord has looked upon my affliction because, because this woman is dealing with rejection. She has been rejected both not only by her father, because I said her father favored Rachel, but this woman is also rejected by her husband. And he says because she was not loved. And then after she gave birth, she's now saying that now my husband will love me, you see. And she's now trying to win Jacob's approval. And in verse 33 it says, and she conceived again and bare a son, and said, because the Lord had heard that I was hated, he had therefore given me this son also, and he called his name Simeon. So she conceived again and bare a son named Simeon, and called her Simeon, because the Lord heard that I was hated. And then it says, and she conceived again and bare a son, and said, now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. Again, she bore another son called Levi. And now it says, because now my husband will be joined unto me. You see, she was first of all separated from her husband. She was not staying with her husband now, because again, Jacob loved Rachel. And she said, now after all, I have given Jacob 3 sons. Now my husband is going to love me. You see, my husband is going to be joined with me. And this is what this woman was throughout her whole life, you see. And she's seeking approval. She's seeking, acceptance. See, and then in verse 35, and he says, and she conceived again and bare a son, and she said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and left barren. Now this is something, you have to deal with, especially when somebody is dealing with this Cinderella syndrome, because now it says, she is now striving to win people's approval. Now she's trying to win her husband's approval, you see. And Leah was an approval-seeking person. And she's saying, if I do this, if I do that, my husband will love me. And this is what usually rejection leads to, is people seeking approval. And this is the result of the fall. And you see, this woman is unloved, because in verse 17 it says Rachel was well favored and Leah was not. So now she's going around and seeking for approval from her husband, which is rightfully so, because her husband is supposed to love her. But this with this thing that happened Jacob was not pleased because the woman that he loved was Rachel. And this everything comes from Laban, because Laban, through this deception, Laban was able to give out and trade her daughter, her elder daughter, for his own greed. And he says here she bare a fourth son. And notice now she takes her eyes off man and says, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. See, this woman now takes her eyes and now looks to the Lord. And the four sons of Leah now is, first of all, now she has stopped bearing. You have Reuben, the firstborn, and you have Levi, and you have Simeon. Now you have Judah. Again, Judah is going to be an accepted line of Christ. You're going to go through Judah. You see, Judah is the fourth son. And Leah was now looking unto God and not man. So we're going to continue on in verse 30. But until then, precious saints, God bless.